program over to Doug. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
The clicker here.
Yeah, I'm actually going to, I'm going to go to the podium if it doesn't trouble people too much with the pivot to have me be behind you. And that way I can see pretty much everybody in the room. So thank you, Stephanie. So as Stephanie teed up, we're here today to get your input on developing a drinking water standard known as a maximum contaminant level. And MCLs, and Damon's going to talk about this in more detail shortly, MCLs are standards that apply to public water supplies. A public water supply is generally defined as 15 service connections serving 25 individuals or more. And I think it's 80% of the population of Massachusetts is served by public water supplies. Looking at my team over here, I got it pretty close. So again, Damon's going to cover this more, but an MCL actually requires, from broad classes of public water supplies, requires sampling for contaminants, and then requires action if the sampling results in exceedances of those standards. And that's the essence of what, as well as other public reporting, public notification requirements, but that's the essence of what an MCL or a drinking water standard requires. So what's on the slide here now is our latest information on what other jurisdictions are doing for drinking water values across the nation. At this point, I believe New Jersey is the only jurisdiction that has a final MCL. So they have, and this established a little while ago, they have established an MCL for PFNA at 13 parts per trillion, and they are still in the midst of their proposed MCL rulemaking for PFAS and PFOA. In Vermont, in January of 2019, Vermont published an emergency rule which codified their health advisory for drinking water at 20 parts per trillion for the 5 long-chain PFAS combined. And they also, at the end of January, committed to initiating rulemaking on MCLs that would mirror that would be where they would start, would be mirroring their codified emergency rule. And I don't actually know the status of that rulemaking in Vermont. Somebody in the group may be able to inform us about that, but I don't know. I don't believe they've actually published an MCL yet. Also in January 2019, New Hampshire proposed MCLs for 3 of the PFAS compounds, and those are listed here up on the chart. And that is still in development in New Hampshire. And then Minnesota also recently, in the last couple of months, has published their drinking water guidelines. Again, it's just a guideline, and that was it was some revisions from what had previously proposed, but these are now their published guidelines for PFAS, PFOA, and PFHXS. And by the way, this table, the columns came out of alignment a little bit. We will correct this for what gets posted on our website so that the columns lined up. But this first column down here is PFAS. Next column is PFOA. And the Massachusetts Office of Research and Standard Guidelines is still at 70 parts per trillion for the 5 long chain combined. And I'll be talking shortly about some next steps on the Office of Research and Standards guidelines, which we are considering revision to that. And then most other states around the country are continuing to use the EPA health advisory for PFAS and PFOA combined at 70 parts per trillion, sort of by default. For PFAS detections at public water supplies in Massachusetts, we've had 6 public water systems so far that have exceeded the Office of Research and Standard guidelines at 70 parts per trillion. And each of those public water systems has taken actions to ensure that the water they're delivering to their consumers does not exceed the Office of Research and Standard guidelines. Actions have included taking wells offline, installing treatment, maybe initially temporary treatment, and then installing long-term treatment, and adjusting pumping rates from different wells and sources. There are 8 other public water systems that we're aware of that have detections that are below the Office of Research Standard guidelines. And we're working closely with all public water systems to ensure routine monitoring so that we have the most up-to-date information on their detections, and also so that they're aware of the actions that we're taking here as part of this process and all the things we're going to talk about for DEP's guidance development, rulemaking, et cetera, so that they're well informed of where we're headed. So this map that you see on the screen is on our website, and we continue to update that whenever we have updated information. So this is a kind of a snapshot that shows at the big picture level public water systems that have sampled and what the results have been and which ones were over the ORSG.
Doug, if I could
yes.
Sort of as an out-of-state,
yeah, sure.
How many total public water systems, what percent is that 14 of, how many total do you have in the state?
We've got 1,700 public water systems across all three classes.
Okay.
So there's about 525 community, about 250 non-transient, non-community, about 900 transient, non-community.
And are they doing active sampling as a result of the health advisory at this point, or are these sort of
Well, so
yeah.
public water systems statewide are required to sample when an MCL is in place. Once there's a standard that requires.
But so you haven't done. There isn't like a statewide survey.
There was initially statewide and actually nationwide sampling under a federal rule, the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, and that was 2013 and 2015, and that was all the large community systems, so 500.
10,000 population and above.
So the largest community systems, and then a smaller sampling of the small, random sample of the smaller systems.
So just to note, for those systems that have had detections, we're doing quarterly sampling.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Anytime we get a detection, then
So we continue to work closely with them and closely oversee that.
Okay. Thank you.
It looks like Doug wants to give another question.
Oh yes.
Sorry, just a clarification on this map. So the way the legend reads, anything white, it says towns that purchase water.
No, actually that's green. It's showing up poorly on the slide.
Okay, all right. Because it makes it look like a lot of the state purchases water.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to see. There, you'll see kind of the Boston metropolitan area that's served by the MWRA, and around Springfield, and around Worcester.
Okay.
There's a few clusters of light green.
Thank you for that.
It'll be a lot clearer if
that
you look on the
now.
website.
Yeah, it's better on the web.
So in addition to this map that is kind of a high-level view, also on the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs data portal, you can link to that from this same page that has the map. It has the actual testing dates and testing results, and you're able to screen for. You can look at specific public water system and get their dates and their results, and you can also screen for over the ORSG. You can look at finished water or raw water. So it's a robust way to see actual data values.
I'm curious, is that all truncated at the reporting limit in UCMR, or do you have any data below the reporting limit?
So any public water system that has tested using the method 537 after UCMR 3, right, we would have the lower reporting. We would have the lower limits of that reporting method or that analysis.
Yeah, the UCMR data itself is just a spreadsheet that EPA provides us. We posted that separately. On the data portal is all the ongoing testing since UCMR 3, and it's at whatever level the laboratories were able to achieve.
So we can send this group a link to the portal where it's easy to find information.
Yes.
Just quick for clarification, were the smallest systems picked because the largest system in the area tested had PFAS in it?
You mean the ones with detections or under the unregulated contaminant?
I was kind of like looking up at like Air, Shirley area. You have a lot of small systems. I didn't know if the small system testing, as a result, was like the large system tested.
Yeah. So the small systems that have been tested are all as a result of site cleanup investigations.
Okay.
So once it's been determined that PFAS is in the groundwater or is in the water, then there's been waste site cleanup driven investigations that have gone out to not only smaller public water systems but also some of the private wells as well.
Okay, so it's not random.
There
were a random set during UCMR 3. Nationally, EPA picked 800 small systems, and we had about a dozen of them in Massachusetts that were part of that random set.
Okay.
I don't believe any of them had detections under UCMR 3, so they're showing up as probably some of the blue dots probably in the more rural areas.
Okay. What was the detection limit under the UCMR for
Uh,
PFOS?
For PFAS and PFOA at that time was fairly high, 20 to 40, I think, were the two detection limits under UCMR3 for those two chemicals, and I forget which one was which. I think it was because one of them had an initial guideline EPA of 200, and one had a guideline of 400. That changed historically, so 20 and 40 were 1/10 of those guidelines back then. But today we're looking at, something in the 3 to 5 PPT range for current testing for those chemicals. A little site specific depending on the levels they're finding.
All right, and the bulk of the detections at public water systems have been linked back to military installations, particularly military installations with airfields. But there has also been out on the Cape, the firefighting academy, as well as a municipal airport is being correlated to the contamination, and also one manufacturing facility in Central Mass appears to be the source.
Which one was that? Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Which one was that, the manufacturing facility?
That is Hudson. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Paul Locke, who's going to talk about MassDEP's forthcoming activity on a proposed cleanup standard for groundwater and for soil under our waste site cleanup rules.